The approach came in April 2025 through carefully coordinated diplomatic channels. The European Union, increasingly concerned about Chinese dominance in African mineral extraction and Russian influence in the Sahel, had developed what it called the European Critical Minerals Partnership. The initiative would provide development financing, technical assistance, and infrastructure investment to African nations in exchange for preferential access to strategic minerals. Gold, lithium, cobalt, rare earths. It was Europe's answer to China's Belt and Road and America's transactional pressure. Burkina Faso, with its significant gold reserves and recent success renegotiating contracts with Western mining companies, was a priority target. The EU calculated that Traoré's willingness to challenge French and American frameworks might make him receptive to a European alternative emphasizing mutual benefit rather than subordination. They were half right. Traoré was willing to consider proposals. But the EU fundamentally misunderstood what mutual benefit meant from his perspective. The initial approach came through Germany's development minister during Traoré's visit to Berlin for an economic forum. The meeting was framed as informal discussion but quickly pivoted to the minerals partnership. Captain Traoré, Europe has watched with interest as you've restructured Burkina Faso's approach to resource partnerships. We respect your insistence on terms that serve Burkinabe development. The European Critical Minerals Partnership is designed with exactly that principle, genuine mutual benefit rather than extraction disguised as investment. We're offering a comprehensive package, €3 billion in development financing over 5 years, technical assistance for refining capacity, infrastructure connecting mining regions to ports, and access to European markets at preferential rates. In exchange, we ask that European companies receive priority consideration for new mining concessions and that existing European operations maintain stable regulatory environments. Traoré listened carefully, then asked the critical question: what does priority consideration mean specifically? And what does stable regulatory environments mean in practice? The German minister chose words carefully. Priority consideration means that when Burkina Faso opens new mining concessions, European companies would have first opportunity to bid before Chinese or other competitors. Not exclusive rights, just first opportunity. Stable regulatory environments means that existing contracts with European companies wouldn't be subject to unilateral renegotiation. Changes would happen through negotiated modifications rather than imposed new terms. So, priority consideration means European companies get access before others can compete, which advantages European firms regardless of whether they offer best terms. And stable regulatory environments means we can't renegotiate unfavorable contracts we've inherited. That's not mutual benefit. That's preferential access for European companies and locked-in terms for existing operations, in exchange for development financing that comes with those strings attached. Captain Traoré, I think you're interpreting the framework more restrictively than intended. I'm interpreting it based on what the terms actually mean. Priority consideration before competitive bidding means reduced competition, which means worse terms for Burkina Faso. Stable regulatory environments that prevent renegotiation means unfavorable inherited contracts stay unfavorable. Those aren't restrictions on interpretation, those are restrictions on sovereignty. The German minister tried a different angle: what if we restructured the proposal? Instead of priority consideration, European companies compete equally with others. Instead of preventing renegotiation, we establish a process where changes happen through dialogue rather than unilateral imposition. Would that framework be more acceptable? Traoré appreciated the flexibility but saw the underlying problem: the issue isn't just the specific terms. It's the premise that European development financing should be conditional on Burkina Faso's mineral sector decisions. Why can't Europe provide financing based on development impact without requiring preferential mineral access? If the financing is genuinely about African development, it should be offered without mineral strings attached. If it's about securing European mineral supply chains, then it's not development assistance, it's commercial arrangement dressed up as partnership. The Berlin meeting ended without agreement but with better mutual understanding. Europe wanted gold access. Traoré wouldn't provide it conditional on development financing. The gap was clear. 2 weeks later, France made its own approach, separate from the broader EU framework. Macron's administration had been working to reset Franco-Burkinabe relations after the military expulsion of French forces. The message: France was prepared to provide substantial development assistance and support Burkina Faso's international standing in exchange for renewed French mining company access to gold concessions on mutually acceptable terms. Traoré's response was blunt: France had access to Burkina Faso's gold for decades under contracts negotiated when we had no leverage. Those contracts gave France favorable terms that we've spent 2 years renegotiating. Why would we grant renewed access to French companies that we just finished restructuring away from unfavorable arrangements? If French companies want to operate in Burkina Faso, they can bid on new concessions competitively like everyone else. But there will be no preferential access based on historical French presence or current French development assistance offers. The French were frustrated. They'd been expelled militarily, then economically sidelined, and now were being told that even offering substantial assistance wouldn't secure renewed access. 3 weeks after Berlin, the European Commission formally presented the Critical Minerals Partnership proposal at an Africa-EU summit in Brussels. The presentation emphasized European commitment to genuine partnership, fair terms, and African agency. But the core structure remained: European development financing conditional on African mineral access preferences. When the presentation concluded, Traoré was invited to respond as a representative of African mineral-producing nations. His response was diplomatic but firm: the European Critical Minerals Partnership is presented as genuine partnership based on mutual benefit. But examining the structure reveals it's primarily about securing European access to African minerals with development financing as the inducement for that access. The proposal offers €3 billion in financing across multiple African nations in exchange for preferential access to minerals worth tens of billions. The mathematics don't suggest mutual benefit. They suggest Europe offering a fraction of mineral value as development assistance in exchange for commercial advantages worth far more. After Brussels, Belgium's development minister requested a private meeting. Belgium had historical mining interests in Central Africa and was eager to expand into West African gold. The minister's pitch was more direct: Captain Traoré, let me be frank. Europe needs reliable access to critical minerals. We're willing to pay well for that access and to structure partnerships that genuinely benefit African nations. But we need some assurance that once we invest in extraction infrastructure, refining capacity, and transportation networks, the commercial terms won't be unilaterally changed. That's not unreasonable. What would make a minerals partnership acceptable to Burkina Faso? Traoré appreciated the directness. What would make it acceptable is this: European companies bid competitively for concessions with no preferential access. Winning bids are based on who offers best terms. Highest royalties, most technology transfer, greatest local processing commitment, best environmental standards. Contracts include clear terms but also clear adjustment mechanisms if commodity prices or operating costs change dramatically. And European development assistance is offered based on development impact, not conditional on mineral access. That's commercial partnership without political leverage. That framework doesn't give Europe any advantage over Chinese or other competitors. Why would we offer development assistance if we get no commercial preference in return? Because development assistance should be about African development, not about European commercial advantage. If you want commercial advantage, compete on commercial terms and offer better deals than competitors. But don't use development assistance as leverage for commercial preferences. That's not partnership, that's coercion with financing. 2 months after Brussels, having received proposals from Germany, France, the EU collectively, Belgium, and Italy, all structured around European development assistance conditional on preferential gold access, Traoré made a public statement: over the past months, multiple European governments and the European Union have approached Burkina Faso with proposals for minerals partnerships. Each proposal offers development financing in exchange for preferential access to our gold reserves. The specific terms vary, but the structure is consistent. Europe wants to secure mineral supply chains by offering African nations a fraction of those minerals' value as development assistance, contingent on preferential access that reduces competition and locks in favorable European terms. Burkina Faso's position is clear: no access based on political leverage. No preferential treatment based on development assistance. No locked-in terms that prevent adjustment. European companies are welcome to compete for mining concessions on the same terms as Chinese, American, Turkish, or any other companies. Best commercial offer wins. That's actual partnership. What Europe is proposing is leverage. And Burkina Faso rejects it. The European response to Traoré's public rejection was swift and coordinated. Within 48 hours, the European Commission issued a statement expressing disappointment that Burkina Faso had chosen to mischaracterize Europe's partnership approach as leverage rather than recognizing it as genuine development cooperation. The statement emphasized that Europe's mineral partnerships were fundamentally different from Chinese extraction models or American transactional pressure because they emphasized sustainability, transparency, and mutual benefit. But the statement carefully avoided addressing Traoré's central critique, that European development assistance was being conditioned on preferential mineral access. 3 weeks after Traoré's statement, at a European Parliament session on Africa policy, several members questioned whether the critical minerals partnership approach was working. A German Green Party MEP was particularly pointed: "We've been told that Europe's approach to African minerals would be based on genuine partnership, not the extraction models we criticize China for pursuing." But when African leaders like Captain Traoré examine our actual proposals and point out that we're offering development assistance conditional on preferential mineral access, we respond by claiming he's mischaracterizing our intentions. Perhaps the problem isn't his characterization, perhaps it's our proposals. If we genuinely want partnership based on mutual benefit, why are we conditioning development assistance on commercial mineral preferences? That's leverage, not partnership. The European Commissioner for International Partnerships defended the approach. The critical minerals partnership is designed to create win-win situations where European investment helps African nations develop their mineral sectors while securing reliable European supply chains. This isn't leverage, it's alignment of interests. African nations get development financing and technical assistance they need. Europe gets reliable access to minerals our industries require. That's how international partnerships function. But Traoré's public rejection had created space for other African leaders to question European proposals more openly. At an African Union mining ministers meeting 2 months after his Brussels statement, multiple ministers referenced Burkina Faso's position when discussing their own negotiations with European partners. A Congolese minister was direct. Captain Traoré articulated what many of us have been thinking but were reluctant to say publicly: European proposals offer development assistance conditional on giving European companies preferential access to our minerals. We're told this is partnership, but examining the mathematics shows Europe offering a fraction of mineral value as assistance in exchange for commercial advantages worth far more. Burkina Faso's willingness to reject that framework gives other African nations confidence to demand better terms. The shift was significant. European officials had hoped African nations would compete for European investment by offering favorable mineral access terms. Traoré's rejection instead created pressure on other African governments to demand terms closer to what Burkina Faso was insisting on: commercial competition without political leverage. 4 months after Traoré's statement, a consortium of European mining companies requested a direct meeting with him, bypassing governmental channels. The message was pragmatic. European companies understood that preferential access wasn't available, but they wanted to explore whether commercial partnerships on competitive terms were possible. The meeting took place in Ouagadougou with representatives from French, German, and Belgian mining firms. The lead negotiator, a French mining executive, opened carefully: "Captain Traoré, we understand your government's position on preferential access. We're here to discuss whether European companies can compete for Burkina Faso mining concessions on purely commercial terms without political conditions or development assistance linkages. Traoré appreciated the direct approach. That's the right question. European companies are absolutely welcome to compete for concessions. What are you proposing? The consortium's proposal was detailed. They would bid on upcoming gold concessions offering 20% royalties to Burkina Faso, commitments to build local refining capacity within 3 years with technology transfer to Burkinabe engineers, and profit-sharing arrangements where Burkina Faso would receive 65% of net profits after cost recovery. In exchange, they wanted 15-year contract terms with clear but reasonable adjustment mechanisms. Traoré's team reviewed the proposal carefully. The terms were significantly better than what European companies had offered historically and competitive with what Chinese and Turkish firms were proposing. The 20% royalties exceeded Burkina Faso's 15% minimum requirement. The refining commitments and technology transfer were substantive. The 65% profit share was at the higher end of international standards. These terms are competitive, Traoré acknowledged. If European companies bid on upcoming concessions with proposals like this, they'll receive serious consideration alongside bids from other companies. The best commercial offer wins, which is what we've been saying all along. Why couldn't European governments propose this framework instead of trying to tie development assistance to preferential access? The French executive smiled slightly. Because governments think in terms of comprehensive strategies where development assistance creates goodwill that translates to commercial preferences. We're business people who think in terms of what it takes to win contracts. If Burkina Faso wants competitive bids without political strings, we can structure competitive bids. Our government's insistence on tying assistance to preferences was making it harder for us to compete, not easier. The consortium won 2 significant concessions in Burkina Faso over the following 6 months by offering competitive commercial terms without governmental political linkages. The contracts became models that other African nations referenced when negotiating their own mining agreements. European companies that competed on merit rather than seeking preferential access based on governmental development assistance found they could win contracts. European governments that insisted on preferential access as condition for assistance found themselves sidelined. 1 year after Traoré's initial rejection of Europe's approach, the European Commission quietly restructured the Critical Minerals Partnership. The new framework maintained development assistance for African mining sector development but formally decoupled that assistance from requirements for preferential European company access. The restructuring was presented as refinement based on African partner feedback, rather than acknowledgement that the original approach had been rejected. But everyone understood what had happened. Traoré's public rejection and insistence on commercial competition had forced Europe to change its approach. At a mining industry conference 18 months after the Brussels summit, Traoré was asked about the evolution of European minerals policy in Africa. His response was characteristically direct. Europe initially approached African minerals partnerships the same way other external powers have, offering something African nations need, development financing, in exchange for something Europe wants, preferential mineral access at favorable terms. When we examined the proposals, the mathematics showed Europe offering a fraction of mineral value as assistance in exchange for commercial advantages worth far more. We rejected that framework and insisted on commercial competition. European companies welcome to bid for concessions, but best commercial offer wins regardless of whether it comes from European, Chinese, American, or other firms. Europe's response was initially to claim we were mischaracterizing their intentions. But when European mining companies realized they could compete successfully on commercial merit and when other African nations began demanding similar terms, Europe restructured the partnership to decouple assistance from preferential access requirements. That's progress. It shows that when African nations insist on genuine partnership rather than accepting leverage disguised as cooperation, external powers will eventually adjust. But the adjustment only happens when we're willing to reject unfavorable terms even when substantial financing is being offered. 2 years after the initial European approach, multiple African nations had adopted frameworks similar to Burkina Faso's. Development assistance welcomed based on development impact, commercial mineral partnerships based on competitive merit, no linkage between the two. European companies that adapted to this framework by offering competitive commercial terms without seeking governmental preferential access found success. European governments that insisted on tying assistance to commercial preferences found themselves with neither influence nor contracts. The shift represented a fundamental change in how African minerals partnerships were structured. From European assistance conditional on preferential access toward genuine commercial competition with development assistance as separate consideration. When asked whether this approach risked pushing Europe away from African minerals entirely, Traoré's response was pragmatic. If European companies can only compete for African minerals by receiving preferential access through governmental leverage, then they're not competitive and shouldn't win contracts. But if European companies can compete on commercial merit, offering better royalties, stronger technology transfer, more local value addition than competitors, then they'll win contracts. The question isn't whether we risk pushing Europe away. The question is whether Europe is willing to compete commercially rather than relying on political leverage. Those European companies that answered yes to that question are operating successfully in Burkina Faso and across Africa. Those that answered no are the ones being pushed away, not by our rejection, but by their own unwillingness to compete on merit.